In a previous video, we discussed the benefits of connecting your SAINT VRM system to a third-party asset management source, such as Active Directory, and keeping the VRM's asset repository up to date automatically through that connection with the latest list of assets, as well as asset information, such as when an IP address might change. In this video, we want to discuss how to take advantage of that dynamic asset synchronization and configure a scan job to automatically scan the most current collection of assets without having to manually maintain that scan job. First, let's view the current assets that are associated with a specific asset source that we set up as an example from a previous video. We'll navigate to the Manage tab and the Assets option. And these are all the assets that we have in the VRM repository presently. And you'll notice an asset source GUID field. I added that from the Choose Column selector to determine what assets were in the repository as a result of an asset connection. I can also filter this list to find out what assets were in that asset source by filtering on the asset tags, because the asset tag, asset source, will connect and update a tag every time an asset comes into the repository based on that asset source. And as in the previous example in the other video, we created an asset connector to an Active Directory service, and we called it VRM Test AD. And so that way, for this scan, we want to select that asset source to collect all the latest assets from. And now what we see is through that connection, we've had two assets pulled in, and that dynamic synchronization happens every hour based on that connection that we established through the Asset Source tab. And so what this tells us is based on the most current information, we have information that are default within VRM system. It talks about criticality, internet facing, and sensitive data, whether a previous scan found sensitive data on the machine or not. But you'll notice the Active Directory scan node was the VRM node that we used to make that connection to that Active Directory service. Currently, these assets have these IP addresses with these tags, and you'll notice the asset source tag VRM test Active Directory. But you'll also see the operating system type, the class, host name, when the connection was created and when the information was pulled over, net BIOS, and description and location were two other attributes that were in the Active Directory and were pulled over there and tagged as well. So in our case, we're going to run a scan dynamically from all assets that are in the repository as of the time a scan job is executed. And currently, that tells us they'll scan these two assets. So to create a scan job, we can do that either by navigating to the scan job field and then using our action to create a new scan job, or as a shortcut, we can go to the create option, it's a plus sign, and create a job. So we'll give the job a name. We can give it a description, that's optional. And for the purpose of this scan, we want to do a full vulnerability scan, so we'll select the vulnerability scan policy from our categories and the full scan policy associated with that category. Now, this is where we take advantage of that dynamic connection. You'll notice right now, currently, the default scanning engine we're using is the management console scanner. In our case, we're scanning a remote site, so we want to select the scanning engine that connects to that remote site. And we have a scanning engine on an AWS service that we call Active Directory node. So we'll select that. And rather than manually entering our targets into a target field, we want to take advantage of that asset tag that's associated with our asset database to make sure that we always grab the most current list. So we'll select asset tag. And again, we want to locate the right source, because the capability allows you to connect to multiple sources. In this case, we want to select this specific source to run the scan. We'll see that filter criteria tells it we're going to connect assets to the scan job based on all assets in our current repository for that tag. So we'll see this selector says automatically pull all assets from that are tagged with that source whenever the scan is run. Now, for the purpose of this scan, we'll skip authentication. We'll run this as an uncredentialed scan. And we'll leave all this VRM defaults, all the configuration defaults for the scan workflow. We'll skip past this process. And the last process is to schedule when we want to run the scan. For our purposes, we'll scan immediately. The scan window, we'll leave that out for now. That's just an option to be able to let you constrain when scans run. So, such as if you have a service level agreement that scanners can only run, say, midnight to 6 a.m., then that would be a scan window that you could define scan activity. In our case, we're just going to run immediately during the course of this day. And we don't have any rule sets that we're going to use at this point related to any kind of automated ticketing or ticketing or any asset rules in terms of defining particular asset tags on the fly. So we'll just schedule the scan and run immediately. Then we'll go back to the scan tab to see that that scan was generated. And you'll notice the number of targets varies. And as we talked earlier about the benefit of this, is when the scan gets executed, the first thing it does is go to the asset repository in VRM and collects the most current list of assets. And that includes its current IP address. And we set that asset source synchronization to happen every hour. So when this scan runs, it's going to be based on the latest number of assets and the asset attributes, such as IP address, MAC address, host name. It was pulled into the repository within the latest hour. You don't have to interact within that scan or scan configuration any longer. And you could set that up as a scheduled scan, and it would automatically, each time that scan executes each month, say, for example, and automatically pull in a new collection. So when the scan finishes, we would go to our Analyze option for all vulnerabilities and identify what vulnerabilities we had in that scan action. And so for our case, this was a scan that we have currently running. You'll notice it says incomplete because that scan is actually currently running as active. We could look at intermediate results dynamically as the scan completes, and just as while it's running, you see that currently it has one vulnerability. I've run this scan before in the interest of time, so we have better results to look at. The exact same scan configuration using the asset tags from that asset source. We find the following results. And we had 31 results based on that scan. And by default, you'll notice we have the current IP address, host name, MAC address, the operating system class, the operating system version, and the vulnerability identifier, the latest severity score based on and it'll tell you what version as well, and the rating, high, medium, and low, critical, and the short description of the vulnerability when it was detected. In this case, we ran this scan yesterday, which is now today's the 9th. So we'll see that all these results were found. And there's a results comment field that you can add as well. So if you want to manually enter information about this vulnerability, you can do so by entering a comment, and that would be stored in that value as well. So that completes the process for actually setting up a scan and having the scan job itself automatically, dynamically pull in the latest asset information. So one of the things that additionally you would think about where that takes you over time is to understand the history of a target. Let's just say you have a laptop that has 3 different IP addresses over 6 recurring scans. You can look at the asset history and the assets collection. And again, we could filter. In this case, we don't want to filter down. We'll remove that filter so we can see all of our assets. And if we go back to asset history, we can see all the assets that we've scanned through this system. And in this case, there is one that has 4 different changes over time. And we can see IP addresses have changed, what they started with and what they ended up with. MAC address changes if there were any, BIOS, host name, these type of things. So this will give you a running history. In this case, we'll notice that we've got all the information that we need. And currently, since this is a brand new scan, we don't have any change history yet from that particular asset source. Currently, the changes we see here in the asset history are because of changes from deployed SAINT agents through our VRM connection that were local installed agents and reported back changes in the IP address. So as we can go back, continue to go back to our scan, look at our scan status. We already see we have 89 results for those targets. So this completes the process for setting up the scan using the asset source and showing how you can dynamically get changes over time and a place in the history where you can actually see those changes when they were reported back. We hope that this video was helpful in your understanding of the use of the asset source feature and how it benefits your organization in assessing the latest risk exposures based on the most current list of assets that impact your organizational risk. Thank you for watching.